Hey, Intel. Hello? Anybody there? Or are you too busy hiding in shame for having your butt handed to you on a silver platter? From Apple. Okay, I know I'm late to the party, but then again, I'm always late to the party on everything. So basically, sometime a few weeks ago in November, that was too long ago, there was an Apple event talking about the M1 chip. It's pretty much all about the M1 chip. Despite that, yeah, they had categories where they released macOS Big Sur and 2 new MacBooks plus the new Mac Mini. Yeah. There were those things, but let's face it, pretty much the entire event was based off the M1 chip. But also we can recall that Apple made some fairly misleading, bold claims. I'm saying misleading because if you take a look at the graphs, you may notice that they're not labeled. Not very useful nor helpful, and it made me so mad when I watched the event because those graphs, they just weren't helpful at all. Their axes weren't labeled, points weren't labeled. They were just so vague on what they were describing. Like, latest PC chip? That varies. Are you talking about Intel's Celeron or 28-core Xeon? There's a slight difference between every single PC chip. So, not to mention AMD is also out there, so yeah, the graphs were very vague and you could say misleading, and that really made a lot of tech YouTubers like myself upset. Some more than others, to the point where they say they were disappointed in the event. Me, on the other hand, I was quite surprised. While I had no idea what they could have meant for the performance aspects, because they were so vague in terms of showing off where the M1 stacks up on the performance graphs, I was confident on battery because Apple has been pretty accurate when it comes to battery claims, except for the iPhone SE. In terms of battery, we got a huge improvement from, like, let's say, the average was around, like, 10 hours? I'll say 10 hours was average before. Now you get basically double that average. Yeah, that's insane. It's battery life that you probably never could use because it's like 20 hours worth. 20 hours worth! Usually you're not awake for 20 hours. You should not have a problem with needing to charge these computers that often. Except if it's the Mac Mini, because it's plugged into a wall. There is no reason why I should have a battery. But, well, now that the new Macs are out with the M1, we now got to see where the M1 stacks up against the competition, and now I get my performance confirmations. So, in terms of the numbers, I don't know exact numbers, and I don't know if I'll ever find exact numbers to figure out what it was they were comparing it to. But I have a pretty good idea on where the M1 has placed itself in terms of performance metrics. And let's just say, Intel, you might want to go back to the drawing board. A lot of tech YouTubers were comparing the M1 to the 16-inch MacBook Pro, because after all, well, we got mostly MacBooks aside from the Mac Mini, and it's the same chip, but they were basically comparing it to a Core i9 MacBook Pro. And, well, the 16-inch MacBook Pro technically still did beat the M1, but it wasn't by much. And keep in mind, the M1 is an entry-level like it's going to be the worst Mac processor Apple will ever make. Now I get where the saying first is the worst. Yeah, we have a $1,000 MacBook Air with M1, and it's getting pretty dang similar, slightly slower, but pretty dang similar performance to a Core i9, like, let's say, $3,000 MacBook Pro. 16-inch MacBook Pro. Considering that the M1 is close to that, and it's being offered in a laptop a third of the price, yeah, that's a big deal. Normally around this price point, a Core i5 is a pretty decent one. You're lucky to get a Core i7 if you can, but this thing is kicking butt at $1,000. This is very close to very high pro-end performance. And this is just a basic CPU from Apple. This is crazy. And if Intel hasn't figured this out yet, it should mean, hey, I think it's time to go back to the drawing board, because not only was AMD ahead of them, now Apple is, because they're making desktop CPUs, the M1, and then at some point I bet you there's going to be an M1X. They're making desktop class CPUs, and keep in mind, if their cheapest first edition is that good, last I checked, when it comes to releasing new processors, usually it goes uphill in terms of performance from there. And Apple is usually pretty good at making performance jumps between chips. So I think Intel definitely should have something to fear in terms of the mobile computer market, as well as the desktop computer market. Now, where do they compare to AMD? I'm not too sure, because nobody's really compared the M1 to other computers yet. I'm waiting for Linus Tech Tips to do that, because he's the guy who compares every random computer to every other random computer. Hopefully that means he's comparing it to an AMD chip and not just an Intel. But yeah, these M1s, yeah, they're a big deal. They're amazing. In fact, Apple really should be partying and celebrating their major feat, because if they're getting 16-inch high-end, not base-end, high-end 16-inch MacBook Pro performance on their lowest-end Mac chip for $1,000, and if you want a desktop setup, the cheapest Mac possible, $700? Bravo, Apple. You should be proud of yourself. Head out to the bar and have drinks if they open up at some point. Intel, you've already been struggling against AMD, and now you got a new competitor. Apple's own CPUs. I think it's time to wake up. Go back to the drawing board and get your crap together so you can actually be worthy in this market, because your CPUs are now the worst performing out of the big three. Because technically Apple is a big one, although they only just make them for themselves. But yeah, Intel, you're now third in terms of performance, and the most expensive. I think you want to reverse those. You want to have the best performance and be the least expensive. You're going to stick to most expensive but not the best, and pretty much just go off the fact that your Intel, yeah, don't expect business to stay for that long. So I'm excited for this transition. I can hardly wait to purchase an M1 or an M series Mac, hopefully an MX series, because that would be awesome. But speaking of Macs, why don't you go check out our previous video, which was done by Salt Pepper himself, where he unboxes a new 16-inch MacBook Pro. Okay, let me rephrase that. He didn't unbox it on camera, he actually just gave off his first impressions. But actually, that's a video I seriously recommend you check out, because he did a great job editing it. I love having him as a part-time editor. Thank you, Salt. Alrighty, thank you for watching. Do me a favor and interact with the buttons below. as well as other things below. Check out more videos. My name is Alpha J Wolf, Random Alpha, signing out.